Welcome back to a Celtic to the 90s, which is appropriate this evening, or possibly inappropriate, depending on your memories of 1994. For Celtic fans, they weren't all that great. Laura, that was the last time Raith Rovers made it to the quarterfinals of the League Cup. They've done it again tonight. Is it a dream season for Raith Rovers, or can we get back to winning ways?
Well, put it this way, I'm still very much behind Ange Postecoglou. I've been very positive about him since he came in. I have defended him even beyond the result at the weekend. I'll start to find it quite hard to defend him if we don't go through. So it's one of those where I really don't see it happening where we go out, but you never know with this current situation. We seem as if we're a team that could either, thump them 6 or 7-0, or go out based on a 1-0 where they batten down the hatches, and it's really hard to tell. But yeah, my head says no, we'll take care of it comfortably. My heart says it's possibly going to be a bit more nervy than that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been trolled over the last year, Laura, by fans of various clubs, and now we're being trolled by Raith Rovers fans. So a big shout out to a local hero, Lanky Bass. Come on, ye Raith. Well, I hope you enjoyed tonight, but not too much. A wee bit like Laura, it's one of these games where you go in against Dundee, St Mirren, and you know what? I'm going to also say Hearts at home, because I think that was a very dominant performance, and the scoreline didn't suggest that, but I think that flattered Hearts that day. We were excellent in those 3 games. And then the flip side of that is the poorer performances that we've seen. And in particular, that's kind of peaked against Livingston. So there is a Jekyll and Hyde here, and you're not quite sure which Ange, or, people keep calling it Ange ball. That's grating on me a wee bit as well. What type of football you're going to get from Ange's side? We spoke earlier on today, Laura, about a predicted lineup, JP and I. And my point was that, these are the types of games that are as safe as they're going to be. And that's not being disrespectful to Raith Rovers. You're at home, you're playing a team from the Championship. If you're not going to start someone like Liam Scales, for example, who's on the bench, on a night like tonight, when is a good time to give him a start? Because we've been looking at the bench over the last few weeks, and there's been an absolute dearth of options. Some of that has been poor squad management over a period of time that predates Ange Postecoglou. And other times it's simply because the people on the bench don't have the game time in their legs. Now, we were faced with the same issue last year when we had an injury crisis leading up to the first Glasgow derby of the season, and we've had to throw in Stephen Welsh for only his second start in a Celtic jersey. He's only his second appearance, rather, in a Celtic jersey. He had played against Hamilton Accies the previous season. Yet we have gone with Carter Vickers and Starfelt. Do you think, looking at that, this is maybe the 3rd time actually this season that Welsh has been dropped to the bench? That is, at the moment, our strongest central defensive partnership. What's your thoughts?
I don't know about our strongest, because although Starfelt has got slightly better in recent weeks and looks a bit calmer, I'm still to be convinced that he's the answer to all our problems. I think he's certainly doing better than he was, and he's finding his feet a lot better. Carter Vickers seems to have settled a lot quicker than he did, so I'm pleased to see that. Obviously, at left back, if it's going to be Montgomery tonight, you would think usually Taylor or somebody of that ilk would be a stronger selection. Although I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of Greg Taylor, and I am pleased to see Montgomery in there. Certainly, instead of Bolingoli was never going to be my choice, and I'm not really sure where that decision came from at the weekend. And Ralston has had as good a start to the season as any players we've had, so I'm pleased to see him in there. Going back to the Liam Scales thing, though, I think what this all points to me, and this is speculation on my part, I don't know, but something suggests to me that Ange Postecoglou's not come into the club and gone, of all the players he wants to sign in the world, the one that he wants to sign is a centre-back from Shamrock Rovers. It's got fingerprints of the board and other people at the club all over it, and I don't think he is an Ange Postecoglou signing, and I think that's why you're not seeing him in the team. Furuhashi came in quite obviously an Ange Postecoglou signing and was straight in there. Abada the same, but there are ones like McCarthy and like Liam Scales who just have that sort of aura about them of being long-term links with Celtic that would have had nothing to do with Ange Postecoglou, and it's the type of thing that I just concerns me a little bit about the way the club's run, that these types of players are perhaps being forced on the manager.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you making that comment before, Laura, and having to back you up on social media because you had the audacity to say something that hadn't been confirmed. So you're unable to report that as fact, but imagine speculating on a podcast that might be the case. There are certain things that you can join up the dots and come out with your own conclusion, and you're entitled to do that both as a football fan or someone who is appearing on a podcast. So I think the way that you've described that is likely to be the case. I mean, it wouldn't take the brain of Britain to understand that the two Sheffield Wednesday signings were legacy signings. It was the same when Ronnie Dyler took over Craig Gordon. It had nothing to do with buying Craig Gordon, but when you look at the tenure of Ronnie Dyler, he is under his name as a Ronnie Dyler signing. He had nothing to do with the signing. That's happened over a number of years, and if the players come in and they're exceptional or they contribute, then fantastic. However, because you're better having them than not if they're able to contribute. However, it does. For me, it looks like a situation that Celtic have been in for a long time, which has annoyed or even alienated some previous managers. So you look back at last season and you look at the signing policy, some of the players that apparently Neil Lennon wanted to bring in that we didn't get. You go back to Brendan Rodgers before him and some of the infamous names that he himself almost washed his hands with, Laura. Marion Sved being one of the famous ones because he said as much in an interview. He'll be a good signing. I'm sure he'll be a good signing for Celtic. We've got millions of wingers. So it was quite clear that he had nothing to do with the signing. This is what happens, not just at Celtic, but in modern football across the board. I remember speaking to the Anfield Rap guys who were up in Glasgow for the Soccer Sixes a few years ago, and we were talking about how Brendan Rodgers approached signings when he was manager at Liverpool. And obviously the Anfield Rap guys have got great access to Liverpool, and they'll be getting information from various sources. And the same situation was there. There was a committee at Liverpool who brought in various players, and Brendan Rodgers also fed into that. So he was suggesting players and he was given players. And I don't know what the ratio was, but it seems to be the norm. I think when you're looking at Kyogo, and we have missed him dreadfully since he's been injured, it's quite clear that obviously no one else at Celtic had such an in-depth knowledge of the Japanese game that they could have identified the talents of him, and that has definitely come from Ange himself. There were some suggestions earlier as well in the previous Scottish football show that this was a perfect opportunity to give Scott Bain a start, and I just think that would be far too risky, particularly with the fact that Hart has been given the captain's armband. He is someone in that team that's as solid as anyone, and I'd be playing him every single week when available.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of famous phrase in football that winning is a habit, and although we obviously lost the game at the weekend, what you want to do is create, especially in defence, partnerships and sort of understandings between players that are lasting and are not being interrupted by players being in and out of the game. We only need to look back to last season to see what damage it can do both to the goalkeepers and to the defence in general if you start swapping them about and taking them in and out of the team, and what it can do to a player's confidence. And I think goalkeepers are unique as far as that's concerned. Every other player in the squad can play in probably a number of positions and accepts that there's a rotation involved in their use in a squad. Whereas with a goalkeeper, the tradition is that you have a goalkeeper between the sticks who's your number one choice and stays there as much as possible. And it's not even just that makes me think I would rather have Hart in goal. There's nothing that Scott Bain has done in his previous performances to suggest he would have earned that shot against Raith Rovers either. There's a lot of people say the League Cup's not worth as much, but it's still one of the trophies you need to win a treble. As we all know, that we've won 4 of them in quick succession. And so I don't believe in devaluing the League Cup too much by saying, oh, we'll give such and such a go because they've not had a game in a while or anything like that. I think it's the same as any other game. You have to earn your spot, and Joe Hart has certainly done that, perhaps more so than any other player in the squad this season.
He definitely has. And on the note of the League Cup, obviously it is a trophy that, there was a 4-year monopoly on every trophy in Scottish football. The quadruple treble years, as we'll look back fondly on them as. But the other thing I would say about the League Cup, I've been talking all week about what would be a successful season for Ange Postecoglou's debut. Some people, it goes from one end of the scale to the other, Laura. So some people are saying, right, you can write the league off. It's not going to happen this season. You should never have expected it to happen this season. And then the other end of the scale is nothing but a treble would do. Now, if we take the first example, and strip that one back, you should never have expected it to happen due to the upheaval and the mess that he's inherited, etc., etc. Well, it's not an expectancy, Laura, but when it comes to winning the league title, we don't appoint a manager and invest the millions that have been invested in the playing squad if you're not going to go for the league title, which will result in automatic qualification for the Champions League. Millions, £40 million at stake. So there's no way that anybody could write that off. And I don't think, because the kind of comments are to the degree where it's, you shouldn't expect us to win the league. Well, I'm not expecting it. It's not an entitlement. But in terms of the standards that Celtic have set, last season's an anomaly. We shouldn't expect to go 2, 3, 4 seasons without winning the league. If indeed that is the case, and there's been signs in the first 14 games under Ange that it might be the case, then the cups are hugely important to Celtic this season. Because if you don't win them, then it's a disastrous season.
Yeah, it really is. Like I've said before that I think with Celtic having the resources at their disposal there is no excuse for not being in contention for all 3 trophies every season, because at the end of the day, we have a lot more cash, we have a lot higher standard of player, or like to think that we do, or we have at least the ability to attract a lot higher standard of player than a lot of the other clubs. So at the end of the day, your Hibs and Hearts and Dundee Uniteds of this world would love to have even a fraction of the finances to spend on their teams that we do. And so we almost have an obligation to use those resources to the best of our ability, and that means competing for trophies on a season by season basis. I mean, you only need to look at St Johnstone. They won 2 domestic trophies last season on what I would imagine is a fraction of the budget that we've got. So if they can do something like that with merely ensuring that their club is as well run as possible, and foregoing some of the finances that we have at our disposal, then we really have no excuse. I've said before that I think that Ange is probably being judged a little bit too harshly at the moment, and I am willing to give him more time given the absolute mess that he's overtaken. I think that memories of football fans can be short as far as that's concerned when we think just how poor we were last season. And to that extent, I'm willing to say that perhaps the league is not something that we're going to achieve this season, but I do think the domestic cups are something that we should really be going for, because as everybody knows, you have to win a league over 36, 38 games a season, but a cup only requires you to play 6 or 8 games to the best of your ability to win that. And I don't think, regardless of the rebuild that's going on at Celtic at the moment, that should be beyond us.
No, it definitely should not. And again, a point raised earlier is we have to play even fewer games if you're looking to win the League Cup. I think this has all the potential of a banana skin, simply because you're coming up against a team who will be feeling as though it is a free hit. They're coming up a division to play Celtic. It's at home. And we have previously been poor in games like this in previous years, where we've come up in a cup against an Alloa or Morton, for example, and St Mirren when they were in the Championship under Jack Ross. And we've actually struggled against these teams. So another thing I'm going to bring up, and I suggested this earlier on when I was talking to JP, we were looking at the lack of opportunities on that bench against Livingston, Laura. And one of the things I says to JP was, in order to make the change of shape, the change in tempo, that may get the break or open up the defence that we required on Sunday. It doesn't always have to be a typically offensive player or an attacker that you're bringing on. We didn't have that option anyway. But I did feel that the changes that were made were the wrong changes. And I suggested that Ralston and Montgomery would have given a completely different dimension to the side, because I don't think, as much as I like him as a footballer so far, and I think he is going to develop into a solid signing in Juranovic, I was astonished when Bolingoli came in, but obviously I'm just trying to maximise the players that he has at his disposal. I think one thing is clear, they haven't, the two of them, and I know Bolingoli's not had much of an opportunity, but they don't seem to have fulfilled that inverted fullback role as well as Ralston and Montgomery have. And then once you get into that position in the final third of the park, you look at Montgomery, he's confident running at players. He's got a trick or two in him, he can advance, he can get the ball in. And Ralston's the same. I'm not saying he's a tricky player, Ralston. Sometimes it looks laboured, but he gets by his man and gets the balls in. And I think that's the changes, as well as switching Abada and Jota to give the fullback something to think about, something different to think about. That's the kind of changes I would have been looking at on Sunday. And I'm delighted actually to see that both Ralston and Montgomery are back in.
Yeah, I think it's been the main criticism of Ange, and like I say, I think there's many other reasons other than the manager to criticise why we're in the position we're in at the moment. But it is one criticism of Ange that I have agreed with since the Livingston game, and that's that, he famously has said previously that Plan B is to make Plan A work even better, and I do think that sometimes that just doesn't work. You do need a second option. You need a change in shape. You need a change in formation, a change in personnel, and I think he's not doing that quickly enough in games. That's the one criticism of the way that he's managing so far that I would say I agree with. And like you say, I think there are ways in which you can change the shape that doesn't necessarily mean bringing on an extra striker. You can go from playing 4 at the back to playing 3 at the back and give yourself 2 wide fullbacks that are able to support the attack and play much better, which, like you say, Ralston and Montgomery could do if given the opportunity, if we're not getting goals tonight. And I think Ralston and Montgomery are two that have showed how mobile they are and how willing they are to get down the byline, to get down the touchline, and get to the byline and put balls into the box. Ralston's even chipped in with a few goals this season, so they do perhaps give you the option to change shape without changing either of them specifically, perhaps taking a player from the middle like Turnbull or McCarthy off if they're not having an impact, and putting on a centre back to make that change in shape is something that I would consider later in the game. But yeah, I think Montgomery and Ralston are definitely good options for that. And everybody's talked about Welsh being disappointed about being dropped before, about certain other players being disappointed about being dropped. I think Ralston would have been quite right to be disappointed at having been dropped at the weekend, and I am glad to see him back in.
No, I am as well. I mean, he was one of these guys who was on the end of incredible criticism over a period of time. He comes in, people can't believe he's the first choice right back, but he made that jersey his own. It was on merit. And then he dropped out, which is understandable, to try and bring in Juranovic. He also had illness to contend with. But I thought Livingston was a good opportunity to bring him back in. Someone made a great point earlier on today on the back of the bulletin with JP and I, where we were talking about even the best managers have to adapt. And Martin O'Neill, the example that was given is Martin O'Neill went to a plastic pitch at East End Park, and that was a notoriously bad playing surface, and completely adapted to that and played a different game and got results. And I think that very quickly, Ange needs to realise that, in the Scottish game, if you are to succeed in the game and last as the manager beyond one season, because there has been various managers who haven't, in the hot seat at Celtic, then there are some games that you don't play that free-flowing football as a rule. You have to get the result first. And I think he's probably learned his lesson from that, judging by some of the quotes post-match as well. Well, let's hope he's learned his lessons, because we can't see too many games like that and results like that going against us. Now, that is it in terms of changes. So 3 changes to the defence, which is understandable. The rest remains the same. So we're matching up with McCarthy and Turnbull, as the 6 and the 8, as you could probably call them. Rogic playing the number 10 position with Jota down the left, Abada down the right. And up until today, the only fit striker, Ayeti, playing through the middle. But we do have an option on the bench. Giacomakis, are you looking forward to seeing an appearance from our Greek striker this evening?
Yeah, I really am hoping to. I've looked at as much of what he's done last season as I could. YouTube clips don't really do anybody justice, and they can quite often do the opposite and make a player look better than they actually are. So I'm just pleased to see him there, and pleased to see him looking as if he'll be available as an option going forward. It was something that we raised last Friday when I was on the bulletin with Tony, and something that I know he talked about again on Monday. But the idea that Giacomakis came in and wasn't, ready and raring to go was something that I think was disappointing a lot of people, especially when soon after he comes in, Kyogo gets the injury, and we're left, dealing with Ayeti being up front when he's, not been the answer to our problems for over a year now. I think Giacomakis, this is an ideal opportunity for him to get 15 or 20 minutes at the end of the game, no matter what the score is, because, you're hoping that at least if we're behind or anything like that, he can come on and score goals. If we're ahead, he can maybe help wrap it up for us. So there's no disadvantage to bringing him on, I don't think, and getting him a run out and getting some minutes in his legs, because he's going to definitely be required in the seasons to come. Depending on how long it takes Kyogo to come back from his injury, and if any of the backup choices for Kyogo go off injured themselves, then we're going to need him going forward. And as we do in any position, we need a few options there.
It's brought up a lot of questions, isn't it? The fact that Kyogo got injured, we had offloaded a wee bit earlier Klamala, Bayo, and then Eddie and Griff. And then we were left with no options whatsoever. Ayeti's thrown in. I think he did himself absolutely no harm over the piece. I know that he was less effective on Sunday, but, who had a good game on Sunday? And, he has now given us an option for when Kyogo comes back. Then you've got a player who was the top scorer, the top league in Dutch football last season. But there's all these question marks around, why did Celtic get him for 2.6 million? Is he a one-season wonder? These are all these kind of doubts, basically looking at the stats rather than knowing the background to this player. So I'm very intrigued to see him, and hopefully, he gets at least half an hour tonight so we can get a good look at him and see, is he going to give us an option up front whereby we've actually got 3 strikers, and then it really does open it up for the gaffer when he's looking on the bench going forward once Kyogo's back. But touching on the McCarthy-Turnbull midfield situation, Laura, you're a massive fan of Turnbull, as am I. He hasn't played particularly well over the last few games, and I think McCarthy came in for a huge amount of criticism. I said earlier on today, the best thing to do in that scenario, it's not like McCarthy doesn't have the experience. He's not a young kid coming in who's going to suffer from having a couple of bad games and getting some criticism thrown his way. The best thing to do is just play him again. Let him play out of that bad form.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Turnbull, I've got a fair bit of stick just because I am a fan of him and he has been playing poorly recently. I'm nothing if not honest about my assessment of a player. I think his major problem is that he's either one of the best players in the team or the game totally passes him by. And unfortunately, in too many of the games this season, I would say the game has totally passed him by. He's not one of these players who can have an impact regardless of whether he's having a good game or not. You know, we've seen plenty of players over the years who don't need to be outstanding to still have an impact in the game. And unfortunately, he's either our match winner or he's nowhere to be seen. And I think he needs to be delivering a little bit more consistently than that for us. That's probably about as strong words as I've had for David Turnbull since he signed. I still think he's, on his day, he's one of our best players. But yeah, he's not been performing consistently. He's not been delivering consistently for us. McCarthy, I have to admit, I was not overly enamoured when we signed him. I thought it smacked a little bit of somebody who kind of knew his opportunities at the top of the English game were coming to an end because of a couple of pretty serious injuries. And, you know, the money on offer at Celtic, or the opportunity to play in Europe at Celtic, was something that he perhaps wasn't going to get elsewhere, and probably grabbed with both hands. I don't know that he was a particular answer to any of our problems, and I've not seen anything so far to suggest that I think he merited a 4-year contract. So it's difficult to say that I'm particularly enthused about what he's done for us so far. Obviously, he's had the COVID issue to get over, and I'm sure that's affected him, but I'm yet to see what exactly the reason was that we signed him for, and what he actually brings to the team, because he doesn't even particularly strike me as an Ange type signing either. He's a bit of a sideways passer for me, slows the game down a little bit too much, and just is the opposite of everything that I've seen from players that Ange has wanted to bring in, who are a lot faster paced and a lot quicker with the ball. So I might be being particularly harsh on him. He might have a lot more to offer us throughout the season as he regains his fitness. But yeah, I still remain to be convinced.
Well, as we talk, the famous or infamous lights show is underway. The disco lights, as they were being called earlier on, that's underway at the moment. Now, when we're talking about a player like Turnbull being the match winner or completely anonymous, there's been so many players like that in the past. I think people used to say that about Samaras. You knew within 5 minutes or with his first touch of the ball if you were going to get a match winner or the opposite. And last season, the frustration I always had with El Yunusi is he was a bit like that. He was either a 9 or a 4. And then Incham was like that, but he gave us far too many 4s near the end of his Celtic career. I think what I like about Ralston as well is the way that, and the best example of this was, I think, against Real Betis, where he was having probably one of the worst games he's had this season for 75 minutes. But he's a workman-like kind of player with an attitude that the head doesn't go down. He continually comes back for more. And what you actually found with Ralston is that he came into a game in the last 10 minutes. I think there are certain players that don't have that in them. And I think I'm a wee bit worried that Abada has shown a bit of that. Now, I'm caveating this by saying he's 19. I get that. He's coming to a new country. He's adapting to not only a new way of life, but a whole new team. And he's shown some flashes of absolute brilliance. I'd like to see him have a good performance tonight, Laura, just for his own confidence, because it has faded over the last few games.
Yeah, he's another one who, in a few games this season, has just let it completely pass him by. The Rangers one was another one where he was absolutely anonymous. So for his own confidence, like you say, it would be good to see him come in and get up and running. But I think what happens sometimes with these overseas signings is we're a lot less tolerant of their poor performances and their need to settle in than we sometimes are of our homegrown players. You know, you're talking about Stephen Welsh, who's a couple of years older than Abada, who still gets a lot of slack, I think, from supporters who say he's still young and he still needs time to develop and this kind of thing. Whereas with Abada, they're expecting him to hit the ground running and just, you know, slot in as soon as possible, perhaps under the assumption that because he is a player from elsewhere that he's of a higher standard. But I think there's enough there, given his age, to suggest that we've got a good player on our hands. Consistency is something that I think will come with age. And like the point you were making earlier, I think playing him is going to be the thing that sorts these things out, and not having him in and out of the team constantly. Obviously, the game against Betis, he couldn't play for other reasons, so that's understandable. But as long as he's available, I think he should be in and around the first team, because I think that's the only thing that's going to improve him as a player. I really like him. I think he's got the right sort of combination of assists and goals so far. He looks dangerous. He looks enthusiastic. He looks willing to take on players, which is something that I think's been lacking in our wide players for a while now, or apart from Forrest, obviously. And I think, I think another year, 18 months down the line, we could be looking at one of our best players.
Let's hope so. The game has just kicked off, Laura. Talk about wide players. I noticed that Johnson isn't even on the bench tonight. Hopefully there hasn't been a reoccurrence of his injury. I noticed that he's not in the squad. So, as I say, hopefully that's not another injury for us to worry about. But the game is underway. Let's get to the action. We'll come back at halftime to get your thoughts on the first half. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved, and to Laura Bradburn for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.